James had always dreamed of owning a house with a history. He was fascinated by the stories old houses could tell, the secrets they held within their walls. When he saw the for sale sign on the old Victorian mansion on Harbinger Lane, he couldn't resist. It was as if the house was calling out to him, beckoning him to uncover its past. The house was a steal, practically a gift. The overgrown garden and the peeling paint only added to its charm in James's eyes. The realtor's smile was a little too eager, a little too knowing as he explained the low price. There was something unsettling about the way he spoke, as if he knew more than he was letting on. "It's had some trouble, this old place," he'd said, eyes flickering to the basement door. His tone was casual, but there was an undercurrent of something darker. "But a young man like you, full of life, you could bring the light back to it." James felt a surge of optimism. He was determined to restore the house to its former glory. James, blinded by excitement, ignored the warning bells ringing in his head. He was too caught up in the dream of owning such a magnificent piece of history. He signed the papers, got the keys, and stepped inside his dream home. The air inside was musty, filled with the scent of old wood and forgotten memories. He spent the first few days unpacking boxes and exploring the dusty rooms. Each room seemed to whisper its own story, and James was eager to listen. Sunbeams slanted through the grimy windows, illuminating cobwebs and dancing dust motes. The house was alive with the echoes of the past. The house creaked and groaned around him, settling after years of neglect. It was perfect. Every sound, every shadow seemed to add to its character. But as the days wore on, a sense of unease began to creep in, a feeling that he wasn't truly alone. It was a subtle shift, a growing awareness of something unseen. It seemed to emanate from the basement door, a dark, forbidding maw at the end of the hallway. The door seemed to pulse with a life of its own, drawing his gaze again and again. He told himself it was just his imagination, the house playing tricks on him. After all, old houses had a way of making strange noises and casting eerie shadows. He was alone. He had to be. The logical part of his mind insisted that there was nothing to fear, but the feeling of being watched persisted. He threw himself into cleaning and renovating, trying to ignore the growing sense of dread that clung to him like a shroud. He scrubbed floors, painted walls, and repaired broken fixtures, hoping to banish the unease with hard work. Yet, every time he passed the basement door, a shiver ran down his spine. It was as if the door was a portal to another world, one filled with darkness and secrets. The realtor's words echoed in his mind. "It's had some trouble, this old place." The phrase took on a new, ominous meaning as the days went by. One evening, unable to ignore the pull any longer, James found himself standing in front of the basement door. His hand trembled as he reached for the handle, a mix of fear and curiosity warring within him. He hesitated, his heart pounding in his chest. What lay beyond the door? What secrets did the basement hold? He took a deep breath and turned the handle, the door creaking open with a sound that seemed to echo through the entire house. The darkness beyond was impenetrable, a void that seemed to swallow the light. James took a step forward, the air growing colder with each step. He was about to uncover the true history of the old house on Harbinger Lane. The basement door was heavy, the wood swollen with humidity and time. It had been years since anyone had ventured down there, and the door seemed to resist being opened, as if it were guarding secrets long forgotten. It took all of James's strength to push it open, the rusty hinges groaning in protest. The sound echoed through the empty house, a haunting reminder of its age and neglect. A wave of cold air washed over him, carrying the scent of damp earth and something else, something stale and unpleasant. The smell was almost tangible, wrapping around him like a shroud. He flicked on the light switch, but the single bulb only illuminated a small circle in the vast darkness. The feeble light seemed to be swallowed by the shadows, leaving most of the basement in an impenetrable gloom. Cobwebs hung thick as curtains, and dust lay undisturbed on the earthen floor. It was clear that no one had been down here in a very long time. Old furniture draped in white sheets loomed like phantoms in the dim light. The shapes were familiar yet eerie, as if the ghosts of the past were watching him. The air was heavy, thick with silence. It felt oppressive, pressing down on him with an almost physical weight. James took a hesitant step down the creaking wooden stairs, his heart pounding in his chest. Each step seemed louder than the last, the creaks echoing in the stillness. He could have sworn he heard a whisper, a soft sigh that seemed to come from the shadows themselves. It was as if the darkness was alive, breathing and watching him. He told himself it was just the wind whistling through the old house, playing tricks on his senses, but deep down he wasn't so sure. But the hair on the back of his neck stood on end. It was an instinctual reaction, a primal warning that something was not right. The silence wasn't peaceful, it was expectant, as if something was waiting, listening to his every move. The stillness was unnerving, making his skin crawl. He took a deep breath, trying to ignore the feeling of unseen eyes on his back. The air was so thick it felt like he was breathing through a wet cloth. He had to get a grip. He couldn't let his imagination run wild. It was just an old basement, a place where memories were stored and forgotten. There was nothing to be afraid of. He repeated the words to himself, hoping they would chase away the unease that clung to him like a second skin. It started subtly at first, a soft tapping sound coming from the basement door at night. James, lying in bed, tried to convince himself it was just the pipes, the house settling. He had heard these sounds before, but this was different. But the sound persisted, night after night, growing louder, more insistent. It was as if someone or something was trying to get his attention. It was a slow, deliberate knocking, 3 times, then silence. The pattern was always the same, never changing. It sent chills racing down his spine, raising goosebumps on his arms. The air seemed to grow colder with each knock. He lay awake for hours, listening to the rhythmic tapping. His mind raced with possibilities, each more terrifying than the last. It was like a morbid metronome, counting down the seconds until... What? He couldn't shake the feeling that something was coming. He wasn't sure, but he knew it couldn't be anything good. The uncertainty gnawed at him, making it impossible to find peace. Sleep became a distant memory, replaced by a growing sense of dread that intensified with each passing night. His once restful nights were now filled with anxiety and fear. The knocking became a constant companion, a harbinger of his growing fear. It was as if the house itself was alive, haunted by an unseen presence. One particularly terrifying night, the knocking escalated into a furious pounding. The sound was deafening, echoing through the entire house. James shot upright in bed, his heart racing. He could no longer pretend it was just his imagination. He could feel the vibrations through the floorboards resonating in his bones. The intensity of the pounding shook him to his core. This was no longer a subtle tapping. It was a desperate plea, a violent demand for attention. Whatever was behind that door wanted to be heard. He couldn't ignore it any longer. The time had come to confront his fears. He had to face whatever was lurking in the depths of his house. With a deep breath, he grabbed a flashlight and made his way to the basement door, ready to uncover the mystery that had been tormenting him for so long. James grabbed a heavy flashlight, its beam cutting through the darkness like a sword, slicing through the void. His hand trembled as he reached the top of the basement stairs, fear gripping him tightly. The pounding had stopped, replaced by an unnerving silence that seemed to echo. He took a deep breath and descended, his heart pounding in his ears, each step echoing. The air was thick with the scent of mildew and something else, something vaguely metallic and unsettling. He swept the flashlight beam across the room, illuminating cobwebs and dust motes dancing in the artificial light. The shadows seemed to deepen, retreating further into the darkness as if alive, watching him intently. He examined the walls, the floor, the old furniture shrouded in sheets. There was nothing there, nothing at all, no sign of forced entry, no explanation for the knocking that had disturbed him. He felt a chill, a prickling sensation on the back of his neck as if he was being watched by unseen eyes. He spun around, shining the light into the darkness, but there was nothing there, just emptiness. The silence was deafening, broken only by the sound of his own ragged breathing. He was alone, utterly alone. But for the first time, he wasn't sure if that was a comforting thought or the most terrifying realization of all.